being lifted. I welcome Daryl Guignol.
See where I can stand here. I want to make sure I'm not in too many people's view line here.
You're doing great.
Maybe if I went over on this side, it might be better after all. Well, first of all, it's really a relief to hear those three speakers animate, because it's been pretty lonely the last 6 months. Imagine how you'd feel if you were sitting in an Environmental Advisory Council with Cavendish Farms and Marketing Board and a whole lot of other people, and saying, you got to pass this so that we can take it to cabinet tomorrow afternoon. That sort of puts you on the spot. Anyway, I'm going to talk about some of the, I guess, problems, but also some of what I see is the potential here on Prince Edward Island. First of all, I'm going to try and get this on. This is Priest Pond Creek and a spring at the headwaters of Priest Pond Creek. Have a good look at it. If you look at it, the vegetation in this area is probably over 100 years old. It's very special in that you won't find it in most places on PEI, because other places have had chemicals and other things in it. But you know, the new policy that was to go in place, if it does go in place, would mean that this spring could be drained. In other words, enough groundwater could be taken out of the area around it that the spring would run dry, provided that there was a trickle of water 100 meters or so down the stream below it. Now this is pretty scary for me, for the simple reason that we have thousands of springs on PEI.
Right.
If you allowed that to happen, that one factor in the new water policy, we would be in severe trouble here on Prince Edward Island. Now I want to start off with just a few things about PEI. We actually were formed, if you wish, from runoff from a high mountain range many millions of years ago. And really what we are is a sandbar with compressed sand or shale underneath us that is just absolutely loaded with water. No question about that. We have about 260 watersheds on Prince Edward Island, and if you count up all the streams draining into each of those watersheds, there are about 5,000 kilometers of stream, which is a lot of stream for a very tiny province. But if you looked at those streams that we have on Prince Edward Island, and if they were in Nova Scotia or New Brunswick, the bulk of them in the summertime would be completely dry. We'd have very few streams that would be flowing in the summertime. They're short, they're spring-fed, and they must have that spring water if they're going to continue to exist. I'm not going to talk about a lot of the things that are on the slide because I don't want to take too much time. But I do want to point out on the top here, this is the Morel River, and this is the Majel River. Just at the end of the presentation, I want to point to a few slides from them. Our estuaries on PEI are still fairly extensive, although they're infilling fast. And so we have something like 1,800 kilometers of shoreline, if you include the estuaries going up and back. And we do have, we do have some of our rivers now with some protection. There is a 15-meter green belt, or if you wish, no cut zone along our streams. But in the Morel, years ago, 1972, a group there actually, the river right there is about 35 meters wide. You can't see it much because you've got trees growing around the edge, but there's a green belt 60 meters on both sides of that river, and it extends, if you count both sides, 45 kilometers from the St. Peter's Bay. And that was established and put into law as a conservation zone in 1974. And so there have been some terrific things that have happened in the past, but in recent years, I can't say that, oops, it's been as spectacular, but anyway. If we look at our springs, this is a trout ray. Those are trout there, brook trout. We have some of the most spectacular brook trout or speckled trout, whatever you want to call them, anywhere in the world probably. And places like the New England States, they kill to have fish like that. Well, they spawn in the springs, sometimes down the rivers, but often right at the headwaters. So if I were to look at a headwater stream, right here is actually a spring that comes out in North Lake Creek. It's one of the, I guess, success stories as well, thanks to, of course, the unbelievably hard work of the Surrey Area Wildlife Federation in that zone. And so they have a lot of rivers that are coming along very well. Now, if you were to count trout right at the spring, and by the way, the spring comes out, it's about 3 meters wide already. So it's a little different than other rivers elsewhere. And you notice all the vegetation is completely full of young trout. Now, our springs on PEI, when they exit the ground, mostly are between 7 and 8 degrees Celsius. But that's 7 and 8 degrees summer and winter, which means it makes ideal habitat, particularly for young fish. And the springs themselves are really the lifeblood of our water courses. I'm not even going to bother to talk about how the rivers themselves are essential for all kinds of life, from amphibians to birds and mammals and everything. It's all interconnected. So when you dry up a river, you dry up the ecosystem, essentially. One of the things that really bothers me, again, about this water extraction, that they talk about, it's okay to take a certain amount of water down, and it won't affect trout. And when I look at it, the trout use the very edge of this, this is not working well for me. The trout use the very edge of the stream, and especially the small trout. And as the stream dries up, the little trout move out towards the middle. And then what happens, of course, when they move out towards the middle, they become food.
Yes. And
so you drop the rivers down, and you have all your little trout eaten. This is not an unusual thing, by the way. This happens very often. We have done studies in all of the rivers, all the major rivers in PEI, some of them time and time again, and this is normally, they're very carnivorous. Again, thinking of that North Lake Creek and some of the areas up there, the group there have restored the habitat for Atlantic salmon, and over the last 4 or 5 years, they have got, this is young Atlantic salmon, they have Atlantic salmon returning to practically historic levels. So that's sort of a positive thing that we can look at. We can do it, but if you look at most of the province, we're just going the other way very, very rapidly. One of the things, this is on the left, again I'm going too fast here, on the left is a winter river. It's bone dry. We see this in other rivers now in the summertime. And you can kill a fish various ways, like pesticides and other ways, but you're surely going to kill them if you dry the river up. And this is happening and has happened year after year. The first time I noticed that Winter River was having severe troubles in 1999-2000, and that area, half the river system below, there's 2 major ponds, but half the river system was bone dry and stayed that way for 6 months, from the middle of August to the middle of February. And A lot of the wells along the river also went dry and had to be dug over deeper. And this is 14 years ago, and Charlottetown still hasn't solved their problems. And Winter River still runs dry in the summertime. And so it hasn't improved very much. If you look at all the creeks, we used to have some terrific rivers or streams going right through Charlottetown, by the way. And they're pretty well all drained down or dried up. If you look at Hyde's Creek, it's in Cornwall, 2009 I think it is, it went so high that it blew out half of Trans-Canada. This is what it looks like in the summertime. No water hardly in it. And that is typical of areas in developed city areas in Charlottetown. We are not managing our water resources very well. I'll just sort of let you read that, but essentially we need to balance what the water that's going out of the water, we call it an aquifer, the top of it is the water table. If that water table drops, say a couple of feet, well, I shouldn't have used that. If the water table drops during the summer, it has to come up sometime so that it's the same level the next spring, or we're in trouble. And essentially, if we don't allow recharge, or refilling that aquifer, if you wish, every year, we're going to run into trouble. Our wells are going to run dry, or our streams are going to run dry. And do they always, at the present time, completely refill? And the answer is no. And we looked very closely at 4 of the branches in West River, and in 2012, 2013, 3 of them didn't fully recharge. And of course, what that means is that there's going to be severe trauma for all the aquatic organisms within those areas where they don't recharge. Why do we have streams presently that run dry because of irrigation? And the answer to that is yes. Last summer, in both the Wilmot River and also the Bradshaw River, those are 2 of the 3 in the Potato Belt, they shut them down in August, all right, when they get to a certain level. But then the water table keeps dropping until leaf fall in the fall. So for 2 more months they dropped. And of course, some of the branches ran right dry, and they think, well, that's acceptable. No, it's not acceptable. What prevents the groundwater aquifer from completely recharging? Well, obviously, a series of dry years or high capacity withdrawals that's been proposed, because you have to bring that water table up every spring. Now, what's been happening lately, there's several things here in that number 2 thing here, which suggests anything that facilitates soil surface freezing and water running off rather than being absorbed into the aquifer. Well, Red's talked about degraded soil organic matter and other things. It's unbelievable what's been happening in recent years. We have had any number of studies on soil and water conservation on PEI. There's so many booklets written, you could have a whole armful of them, but they're not being followed. The guidelines are not being followed. So what you have in the last 15 years, if you look at the normal potato rotation, that is potato, grain, and forage, the soil organic matter in the 15 years has just plummeted. Doesn't work. It's published on the government net, so I mean, you just look it up, it's very obvious. And yet this is supposed to be the model that's being followed by the potato producers, and it won't work. So if you look at things like autumn elevation, is a no-no. Well, everyone does it. Lack of mulching is almost unheard of now to see fields properly mulched. Deforestation is still going on in the Duncan Wilmot and larger fields. The huge fields without any cover in the wintertime and PEI with our winds, it's just incredible the amount of soil erosion. And of course, when you find soil deposited on Cape Breton Island and is identified as from PEI, you realize we're in trouble. If you look at some of the other practices, these are photos that were taken some time ago, and obviously they're pretty grotesque. because this is soil that's going down into Trout River. I'll mention a bit about that later on. But let's look at what's happening recently. This is in the Dunk River watershed in 2013. Frozen soil, 2 or 3 feet deep, frozen. All the runoff going down the rills there into the ditch and down into the nearby river. And if you think that's bad, just go up the river a little ways. This is a complete field that's completely known. No engineered structures, no mulches, nothing in there to protect the soil. And all of that slumping down and heading towards the river. And these are gigantic fields. And by the way, this year, I checked it a couple of weeks ago, and we had a bit of water. And there's a big stream going down through the middle of it. It was in potatoes last year, too. So it just blows you away. And you think, well, what's happening to all this water? Well, what's supposed to happen is supposed to flow over a normal runoff into the floodplain. And because the floodplain usually doesn't freeze because it's tree cover, it sinks into the ground and drops the sediment. But it just completely overwhelms any stream. Here is the Dunk River, right here, right beside that stream, right beside that tree. Here is the width of the flood from here. Oh, you got to go several hundred feet, probably 600 to 800 feet to get to the edge of it. You should see that new culvert down at Scales Pond that I thought was so overbuilt. It pretty near blew out last spring. It was unbelievable. And so the water runs off in jig time and doesn't go into the aquifer. And when you mention this to people, you know what the modelers told me when I mentioned that we're losing a lot too? Oh, that doesn't make any difference. And I'm thinking, am I in a different time warp here or something? This is really strange. Anyway, I have many, many photos like that, and I don't think I'll bore you with them because they're so gross that it sickens me, actually. Now, if we look back at the government programs, let's have a look at the early 90s. You know, they had a conservation program, and that was to encourage farmers to expand their fields by draining the wetlands in the fields, the wet areas where you couldn't get the equipment on early in the season. So they put hundreds of kilometers of tile drainage in there, and of course what that does is you make big fields, all right, but again, you don't let the water settle down to the water table, you run it right off and into the river and down to the ocean. And we have had continual field expansion and hedgerow removal. So now in the Dunk Roman area, in the sandy soils that we have, we got fields, I thought 100-acre fields are big. We've got monster fields. We got those being combined now. So there's just less water available for potential recharge. And what about our development around Charlottetown? Man, oh man, look at this, the new Soviet store was being developed. You see much in terms of protection of the soil? This creek, this ditch runs right down to Ellen's Creek. And it's just horrid. This is what you should have expected 40 years ago. But it's the same today as it was back then. And every year I hear about the extra millions that are being put into covering up the ditches in the city so they can put them through pipes and drain it right into the ocean, rather than putting it into wetland or something like that. So it's like water is something that you got to get rid of, and get rid of it fast. With climate change, if people had seen the devastation that it's caused in the New England states, about 3 years in a row, it was unbelievable. And even last year, I was over the Miramichi, and they had one rainfall event with 5.5 inches of rain. Can you imagine, with no soil organic matter practically left on PEI, we got that before the crops grew much here in the springtime? It would be just unbelievable, the impact that it would have. And so the storm events are going to come. We may not have a lot more precipitation on PEI than we've had in the past, in the next few decades even, but they're going to be vicious at times and cause terrific damage. What about our groundwater quality? Well, you take the water out of the deep water, by the way, I've had projects in all provinces and territories, and I sampled the water in all those areas, and by golly, PEI water is as good as anywhere. In fact, they're infinitely better in most places. And so, we're talking about some of the best water, I bet you, that you can probably on the planet. And so you're gonna send that dirty water back after you run it through the irrigation process and back into the water table for us to drink. Now, you might say, well, there's not that much going back. Let's have a look. No, we better go back to the Wilmot River here first. Wilmot River and PEI. By the way, Environment Canada has an upper limit of 2.9 milligrams per liter for nitrate in aquatic ecosystems. So in a river, that's the highest it should be. Well, last summer, the Wilmot River ran at 9 milligrams per liter. 3 times the maximum level acceptable by Environment Canada. That is pretty scary stuff. You can imagine what the animals are doing in that river. But don't just worry about, be concerned about nitrate. What else is in our groundwater? Oh, about 15 different pesticides. They sample for 33. 15 is slow enough. This last one, ignore this, it's a different scale than the last one. They do more tests, so you got to sort of ignore that one. But the trend is there, and it's pretty scary. These are at low levels, by the way. You're not to worry about them. But I'm not so sure. If I had 4 or 5 of my wells, the synergistic effect might bother me a little bit. But anyway, I'm just saying what government says. Estuarine eutrophication or over-enrichment. This is just one here, but when the water gets white like that, and normally it's just in the estuaries, but I have seen it in rivers too, but a very rare case in rivers. There's no oxygen left. So essentially everything dies. You might get a few mummy chugs because they come to the surface and breathe air, but other than that, you can expect everything in that zone is going to be dead. And it has a terrific impact. I don't know how many different types of fishermen have called me in the last few weeks and say, look, I'm a clam fisherman or an oyster fisherman, and they say, I got a fish practically all over the island to make a living now, and it's a very poor one. Or they might say, yeah, I catch eels, when I go look in the trap, they're dead. It's just awful that we've allowed this to happen to our producers of any of the inshore fishery, really, and shellfish people. And there's other things to worry about that we haven't really talked about. I don't want to get into them. But we have a lot of heavy metals falling on us here too. And because we have high pH and that, we haven't got a problem. But it's not completely a non-existent problem, because O'Keefe's Lake, the mercury in the fish there are far too hard to even eat or consider eating.
Wow.
Now, when we look at anoxic events, in this last year, 2012 was 25, I think there's a few more this year, 25 recorded anoxic events, but there was a lot more on small rivers like the Disable, where I live by. It gets sticky for 4 or 5 days, cleans up, and they don't even bother checking it anymore. I want to put this on because I want to qualify what's on the screen right now. This is some astroceces. These people here are very, very highly qualified. I know Simon Courtney really well, and I can attest to the fact that the data will, I think, be very accurate, but they're not, excuse me, they're not data that have been published in a referee journal, and so we don't like to present things like that, but this is so striking I have to. And just want you to look at, they've been modeling nitrate in the Gulf. This is on Northumberland Strait now. This is the Northumberland Strait between Prince Edward Island and this is New Brunswick, and this is Nova Scotia. And when you start to look at that, you think, well, this can't be true. You mean that 94% of the nitrate that's coming out of these water courses is coming from PEI into the strait? And last year, 97%? Boy, oh boy, if I was a fisherman on the other side of that strait, I wouldn't be very happy, I can tell you that. But what about nitrate loadings for the whole island? If you look at 2006, or 2009, I guess it is. Let me go back one more. 1996, and this is an area where it's really, really high nitrate loading in all the rivers. And you can see how that red zone has increased and increased and increased. And it is, and we're not talking about a little bit of nitrate here. This is terrific amounts of nitrate going into those zones. And the areas we don't have very much is in the green here, northeastern PEI, and here in Miscush, sort of boggy area sort of thing. But the rest of the province is in dire strait. Now, I actually borrowed some of this information from our Canada chair at the university. It is published now, by the way, but just recently, and it's done by a group of people. But this is actually, I transferred this to pounds, to give you an example. But the biggest rivers that we have in the Potato Belt are the Wilmot, Dunk, and Wilmot, Dunk, Bradshaw's not there. But I want you to note this. West, North, and Hillsborough. All three of those flow into Charlottetown Harbor. Now, if you change this from kilograms per day of nitrate nitrogen, now remember, nitrate nitrogen makes up about 97% of the nitrogen. Nitrite about 3%, roughly, a bit of gas, but this is the bulk of nitrogen, nitrate nitrogen. This is how many pounds, or kilograms rather, per day for the whole year is entering the estuary. If you figure it out, pounds, because a lot of people know what pounds is, the Dunk River, this amounts to 1 million pounds of nitrate nitrogen per year draining into the estuary. That's pretty scandalous when you think of it. But that's why those former pictures, if you wish, showed how much was in coming from PEI versus New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. Now the scary thing about this is, here is the area with 12% of PEI, which drains down into Hillsborough, right, Charlottetown in the middle. Now Charlottetown Harbor is deep, it's 70, 80 feet deep in places, but it's got a good outlet here, and the residence time, the time it takes for it to drain is only something like 3 or 4 days, and it's all sort of cleaned out. But you remember those high levels from the Hillsborough River, and the West River, and the North River of nitrate? They're going right down to Charlottetown Harbor. Now you might think, well, that's not very pleasant. Well, it certainly isn't when you think of a year ago, there was an anoxic event here. A few years ago, West River got so bad that all the way from Bonshaw down to the West River Causeway turned anoxic, and even the eels died. Everything died. There are shellfish, fish of every kind, and eels. They opened it up, but it's still draining down there. And North River, most of you can remember when you drove by the North River Causeway, it stunk so much you closed the windows in the summertime. So what does that look like from the air? Well, you can't really see that as well tonight, but there's sandbars developing all through the strait here, and it's sort of unusual. PEI is an unusual situation where the tide rises from each end of the island and more or less meets in the middle. So the Dunk, Wilmot, Bradshaw kicks all that stuff out, sediment and all kinds of stuff, and it hits this way. On the other side, other rivers have all kinds of stuff coming out, and it's heading this way. So they meet just outside our capital city. The only problem with that is there's now a dead area in the strait. No, that doesn't scare people. You should listen to what's happened in the dead area in the mouth of the Mississippi or some other places on the globe. It's just unbelievable what impact it can have. And fishermen, actually, I've had fishermen come and say, look, there doesn't seem to be any lobster essentially from Charlottetown to the bridge. It's not much wonder when the Canada chair says to me, I don't think you're going to find a live lobster larvae in that whole zone. And this is beyond scary to me anyway. Now, I want to expose this. This really annoys me. They the government actually, Water Resources, developed a new water policy for PEI. But they didn't have any input from provincial forest, fish and wildlife. I was so upset. I went to Forest, Fish and Wildlife and I was going to ream all over the director. And she said, what new water policy? Can you believe that? If that's not bad enough, we have researchers at the biology department, like Mike Vandenhoevel. He's got 17 graduate students. They're not just masters and PhDs, postdocs. He's in research going on in New Zealand, Australia, Germany, Scandinavia, the tar sands. And no, none of us asked anything about this, nor the Department of Fisheries and Ocean, nor the public. It's our water, for heaven's sakes, and we can't even have an input in a water. I just wanted to put something up here. The PEI Potato Board states that they want 30,000 acres of potatoes that would only receive maybe 5 applications of supplemental irrigation and would make up perhaps